Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Capital Spotlight. Today, we're here with Jen Daulby of the Congressional Management Foundation, you are CEO. So thank you for coming in today. We're so glad to have you. Tell us just quickly, you have a great resume, so let's just get that out of the way. Tell people about your background in DC.
My resume indicates I have no transferable skills. I've had every job from intern to chief of staff to staff director. I've worked for 4 members. I covered subject matter for 5 committees and worked for 2 Fortune 500 companies. I was a multi-client lobbyist and worked for a GovTech startup company. So nice. A lot of experience on Capitol Hill and off Capitol Hill, and now at the Congressional Management Foundation.
Great. So which companies were you with off the Hill?
I was with Bayer and Land O'Lakes.
Cool. Ah, there you go.
Agriculture.
Yeah, for sure. Gotta love the butter. You know, like when you go to Minnesota, Land O'Lakes is just everywhere.
Oh, they were the nicest people. Farmer-owned company. They were absolutely the best, and I really enjoyed working for them.
So where are you from originally?
I'm from Southern Illinois.
Okay.
So the part of the state where we like the St. Louis Cardinals that we say. It's very confusing for the Chicago area folks, but I'm a downstater.
Okay.
So I joke around I'm closer to Arkansas than Chicago, but it's a great state to be from, and I had the privilege of working for 2 members from my home state, which is how I got to Washington, similar to other stories.
That's great. So tell us a little bit about how you made the jump to DC.
Absolutely. I was in college, boring state college. We had a speaker come that I went to. I think I had to for my sorority to get credits or something. He said, think about your dream job. Well, I was a kid from a town of 6,000 people. My father didn't go to college. We were in local politics. My family had been, so I had a love of government and politics, and I was a poli-sci major. But the speaker said, think of your dream internship, and what are you going to do to get it? My dream internship was going to Washington. I'd never even been to Washington, D.C. The first time I saw the Capitol was when I walked to work on my first day. And my former chief of staff walked me to work, which I have never done for any intern. So it just said what a lovely person he was and what an opportunity. Yeah. So I kept thinking of how do I make that leap to Washington? And now that I have a daughter in high school that will soon be in college, I think we've lost some of that thinking about how you use your summers as stepping stones. And so I interned at the local level in college. Then I interned at the state level in Springfield, Illinois, and I helped a guy named John Shimkus that was running for Congress. Nice. And then he won, and then my uncle, who was in politics, was in my ear too. Hey, I know you said you wanted that Washington, D.C. internship. Why don't you email the chief and see if they're taking folks? And they were, and they paid me, or I would have never been able to come. And that was long before we had paid internships.
That's
and
great.
So it's the power of one person believing in you in Washington and mentoring you.
Sure. So. What do you think, obviously, parents in politics help, but what was that desire to go to D.C. when you'd never even really experienced it? Because a lot of people say, I went on a field trip here, and man, it was so cool. So, how did you develop that without ever being here?
I had a few experiences. High school was one of them where I was in youth and government, and I loved that. And you would take over your state legislature. I think it's similar to boys' state or girls' state. And it was addictive, right? Being on the floor of the state Senate and state house in Illinois was addictive. And I loved it, but in a good way. Yeah. And when you put young students in that opportunity and you make them feel like they are part of the system and what it would be like, even if you're acting it out, the power that comes with that is pretty amazing. That's and after college, I didn't come back to D.C. My personal path took a few different roads before I got back. But I always just had this calling in my background that I liked it. And I remember when my dad was on city council. He ran when I was in 2nd grade. He made us wear these terribly embarrassing shirts that said, vote for my father. I still have not forgiven my mom for making him wear those. And we were campaigning in front of the post office, which, is you're not supposed to do either, in our town of, 6,000 people. And I remember going to city council meetings with my father. And our town had a lot of issues that probably had been neglected. It was a small town, right? It depends on who's in local government. And this thing called zoning had never heard in my hometown. And my dad was trying to do zoning, and he was trying to consolidate some of the services for the city to make it more efficient into one building. And I remember he would have these specs on our table of where you'd put the jail and the library and all these things in one building because it was a small town. And then he got really upset because our high school didn't have weighted classes, and he had 2 kids that he was trying to get to college. So then he ran for school board. So
cool.
I just had this very local experience to government, and I thought, wow, if I could bring a little bit of Southern Illinois to DC, that feels really important to my community.
Yeah, so it seems like government efficiency runs in the family, you know,
Absolutely.
like you want to find ways to make it better. So tell us a little bit about Congressional Management Foundation, what you guys are doing over there.
It makes so much sense for me to come home to Congressional Management Foundation. It is a foundation that's been around for almost 50 years. We are in service to Capitol Hill. That's the first thing I want staff to know. We are in service to you.
Yeah.
We are here to do something for you and not to you. And we show up in a bipartisan way. And when we don't show up, no one else does. We are the people foundation. So we have opinions, and I have opinions, right, of how the first branch should run. But staff are sick of hearing about everyone's opinions, and they need resources, and they need help.
Sure.
So we show up in 4 ways: leadership, management, education, and community. And when I say community, that really is such a pivotal part of what we do because we're trying to create space for bipartisan opportunities.
For sure.
And I'm not going to lock everybody in a room and say, we're going to figure out Medicaid this afternoon. I'm hoping you can have a beer and meet someone across the aisle, and maybe you think of how to work with them down the road.
Yeah, for sure.
Or you have something you experienced together because of a cool event that we did, or an amazing speaker we brought in, or we taught you something about how to lead or manage your office, and now you have that common experience.
Yeah.
And how can I put folks together that have common challenges in running offices and working on Capitol Hill? And through that commonality, can we go accomplish something together down the road? But Congressional Management Foundation has really renewed our focus to come back to Capitol Hill to be in service. And we do programs and provide opportunities for Capitol Hill staff and members.
Nice. So I'm sure most staffers have heard of CMF at some point, but like whether how familiar they are, like can you give a quick rundown of maybe some resources that are like right off the bat, like this is what staffers should know about you?
They should think of us in our setting course book, that if you are a freshman or a new chief, hopefully you've heard about it or seen about it or requested a book, and that is the Bible of how to open a congressional office. And members read it and staff read it. And when I was interviewing for this job and I was thinking about whether I wanted to come to a foundation, and I had a nice cushy job, and I was talking to my friend, and he manages candidates. He's a political consultant. He said, I've had every single candidate read that book, Jen. What you do is important, and don't forget about it.
That's
I said,
cool.
wow, this is bigger than me, and this has been going on for a long time. So I want staff to think of the setting course book that has been in publication for 40 years. I want staff to think of us if they need a staff retreat or they need coaching. I want them to call me with ideas of how about you do this program. And I had a chief call me the other day. I remember several years ago, you guys did this program about how to organize your email box, your email in your inbox. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to go reach out and figure out where to go find that person again. And I want staff to think about us in terms of the Democracy Awards. And again, how we can be in service to highlight the good work of their team. And I want staff to see those emails from us and think about whether they want to attend that event we're going to, whether they want to encourage someone from their delegation, someone they're mentoring, their staff, their peers. I want them to receive that invitation and know it's an opportunity, and that opportunity is for their benefit.
Very cool. So we have an old version of setting course right here. It was something where our office definitely got it when I was on the Hill at some point. I was like, oh, I'd like to become a chief of staff one day. Maybe I should just like read through this whole thing and figure out what I need to do. So I think it can be like accessible and helpful from like intern up to chief of staff and member of Congress.
And it's in the proper order. You've got the Constitution, and then you've got setting course. So we appreciate
And then financial statements.
And then
finance.
I didn't want to say that one. And then financial, and then the money. What's the Constitution? How to manage the office, and then how to manage the money. I love it.
There you go. We're trying to put it all together. You know, government is so good at managing money. So hey, maybe we could learn something.
Exactly.
From
That should be our next book. Yes.
But as far as the Democracy Awards go, this is something that you guys are currently working on, wrapping up nominations at the moment. What you have a few different categories. Tell us more about the awards.
I want to start with the new category this year that I'm most excited about, that I think folks who might listen to this podcast would benefit from knowing. We're doing Chief of the Year.
Cool.
We're doing House, Senate, R&D, and we're giving awards for the behavior that we want to see modeled.
Yeah.
And it is our way at CMF to say there's a certain reason that we have certain awards, because it's activity and it's behavior and it's people we want to reward.
Yeah, that's great.
And I want to emphasize, right, I'm a former chief and I'm a big fan of the chiefs and their importance on the Hill. And I want folks to think about what an important job it is. I want members to pause and think, do I have the right chief?
Yeah.
Did I have the right process to find chief? Is my chief performing the way I want? And I want good chiefs who have been grinding it out and are committed to the institution. I want them to know that we're thinking about them and that their work is important. We have an award this year for bipartisan work and activity too, right? We have to, again, have the awards for the behavior and the activity we want to see on Capitol Hill. And there's so many members that you don't hear about, that you read about, that are quietly showing up every day and they're working together and trying to make improvements for their district. Yeah. And that's the member I want folks to know about. We have award for innovation and modernization. That is a metric that I believe is important on Capitol Hill, and we want members to focus on that. And the constituent service piece. And we had it as one award, and everybody wanted the constituent service award. I thought, well, constituent service means a lot of different things, right? It's mail, it's communications, it's that Washington, D.C. experience. So we broke that category down because I think there's so many aspects to constituent service, and I think staff will really like the opportunity to get those awards.
Yeah, for sure.
And members.
The one that definitely sticks out to me is the modernization and innovation. So can you tell us about some past winners? Like, what have they done to win that award?
Be willing to adopt new technology and processes, right? And if we talked about these awards at, in like a business setting, people would be like, you gave awards for adopting new software and workflows that everyone else in corporate America or within most organizations do. But there's not a forcing mechanism on the Hill. Yeah. And in fact, we all have to be disruptors when it comes to innovation on the Hill, because the metric, and having been the former staff director of House Administration Committee, the metric for the institution will always be safety and security. Did the network work? Did it not go down? Was your data not compromised? But no one is waking up every day within the institution saying, you know what, we've got to get more folks to adopt using Slack, or we need more offices to ask for a new portal for the franking system, or let's think about just small ways that can improve basic functionality, like how do you request days off? So offices that are exhibiting all of those behavior and being thoughtful, and hopefully not having like a bad spreadsheet of like, here's who's coming for a tour. I think Betty and Joe are coming this afternoon at 2. I don't really know.
That
so how do we
familiar.
Offices that are formalizing those basic processes and using tools to do so?
Nice, that's great. We've definitely had people on the podcast who have won awards. Shout out to Michelle Dorothy in particular.
Yes, she's a rock star.
But so we do know some of those people, and you can tell when we talk to them that they kind of have a different mindset about these things, and it really sticks out. But before we dive into some more of your tips on how to be more efficient, can we dive into your resume more specifically real quick on the Hill so that staffers understand why you are credible to give this advice?
Absolutely. So we mentioned my intern experience, and then I went to law school and decided I was going to work on a campaign. This was after I had taken a year off between college and law school, and I worked for my sorority as a consultant.
Nice.
And I share that
classic after college gig.
Right. We're
there.
all student body presidents, sorority and fraternity presidents, college athletes. I tick all those boxes. And I went back to my state legislature, and I was really turned off by the process, right? It's like, wait a minute, I've been playing varsity ball out here. I can't go back. And I had a year to kill before law school because I hadn't taken the LSAT or gotten ready. And that job made me grow up more than anything else I've ever done. You get on a plane every week. You show up at a different city in a setting where you don't know anyone. Yeah. And you try to make their experience better at their sorority. But I just learned so much about myself, and I traveled all around the country. And it was an absolutely amazing opportunity for a kid that didn't have a lot. And then I went to law school, and I went to a state school. I kept my debt down intentionally. I thought I was going to be a prosecutor. I'd like watched way too much Law and Order, and I'm like, I am going to go to Cook County, and I'm going to be a prosecutor in Chicago.
That's what we all do.
That's what I'm going to do, you know? And so it was really a hard process, and my professors were like calling the Cook County State's attorney, and I get on the list, but they don't hire you until after you pass the bar. And it's like kind of typical government process. It's like, you know, you're on the list, so you'll be guaranteed a job in a year, but we just don't know when. I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do? I don't have rich parents. What am I supposed to do? So John Shimkus was in a really tough race, and Rodney Davis was his campaign manager.
Cool.
And I went and I worked on the campaign, and my parents are like, you have a law degree and you're waking up every Saturday morning and you're going to parades? And I was like, yep. And he won. He was in a tough race. It was a redistricting race, and they had a spot for in LA.
Very cool.
And I went. And 2 days later, Cook County called and said, your spot's open. And I said, well, I'm already committed. So it was that kind of sliding doors moment. And I was in LA. And again, my parents were like, didn't you just go to law school? What are you doing here? And I said, no, I have to learn how the Hill works. This is an apprentice system, right? So if you're in LA, you understand how it works. And I was staffing energy and commerce, and I was learning the process. And then the Agriculture Committee had an opening. I was 26 at the time. And so it was a committee that was willing to take a chance on a junior staffer. Nice. I did that for a few years. I learned how to draft. I learned how you look at the Federal Register and you appreciate agencies and rulemaking and just the nuts and bolts of how the floor works. And then I was kind of bored because I wasn't a Farm Bill year. Lovely people. I know what corn and beans look like, so that gives me an advantage on the Hill. So that's why I did that issue, and I really like folks in the agriculture space. But Judiciary had a spot.
There you go.
And that's like, right, that's the sweet stuff. And I had worked for a constitutional law professor. I was his research assistant. I was a con law tutor in law school. Like, again, if I was going to go be a prosecutor, getting to work on Judiciary Committee was it. And Sensenbrenner was chairman, and they moved 180 bills in 6 years.
Jeez.
And that committee has more jurisdiction than anyone else.
Yeah,
and when they
sure.
want to exercise
they can
it,
pull anything in.
it is phenomenal. Right, every piece of code goes through Judiciary Committee. I got my butt kicked. Every Wednesday at 10 o'clock, that committee marked up. Every Wednesday. And it wasn't just we marked up one bill. We marked up like 5. And the minority would throw those amendments on and sit back. And I remember at one point having 10 amendments on a bill that my boss had. And I look back and the committee staff are losing it. I'm like, we are not losing it. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I was like, boss, we're with you. And we were just, and you learn to do that on the fly. And so that's where I cut my teeth, legislation-wise.
Judiciary Committee is just something else.
Oh.
And, I mean, it's so chaotic, but there's so much deliberation. And I think it's just like the essence of Congress,
Mad respect. And at that time, it was just, they really rewarded and leaned in to the dialogue. They didn't care if they were all night at a markup or what have you. And I loved it. And afterwards, it would be so chaotic. I would go to the Subway in Rayburn in the corner, and I would just eat by myself to come down from it before I would go back to the office. Because, you'd get your butt kicked and you'd be like, oh gosh, we live to fight another day. And the amendment passed or didn't. Because if you were subcommittee chair, literally Sensenbrenner would turn his chair and he'd be like, okay. I mean, he would delegate to his subcommittee chairs, and so if you had amendments coming in on your bill, your jurisdiction, you had to be ready. Nice. My party lost the majority. I went downtown for 6 years. I had my daughter. I opened a DC office, and I learned how the real world, so to speak, and how companies and organizations work. And I decided I wasn't done. Yeah. And I wanted to be chief. And Mr. Davis was not the only person I interviewed to be chief, and I share that with staff because people look at your resume and they're like, oh, just all fell together for her. No, it didn't. Sure. Right? I had been on folks' list for several years, and at that point it was really unusual to come from downtown back to the Hill too. So I was kind of fighting what I perceived as that Hill loyalty and royalty, and that we were all looking out for each other. Yeah. And even if someone's boss lost an election and perhaps they were part of that loss, it was like, oh, well, we got to find him a job, and I kind of fought back against that. No, why don't we just hire the best people? And I had worked with Mr. Davis. He was my boss. I was a campaign manager for Mr. Shimkus' campaign. I had a good run. I was with him for 6 years. Nice. And he was one of the most targeted races in the country. And I learned so many good things from him and the culture of our office and just the kind of member he is beloved. Yeah, and it is really fun to work for a member that is beloved. It is very hard sometimes, too, because you're always chasing after every promise he's making and everyone that thinks they're his best friend. But I would pick a member like him every single day. And then we survived the 2020 cycle. No, that would have been 2018 cycle. Republicans lost the majority, and he still won. And he won by like 2,000 votes. CNN called it against us. It was the worst night ever, and that campaign was crazy, and I could talk about that all day long and all that I learned. But I was tired, and I said, can I go to House Admin with you? And I do have this other experience I can bring, and I think we need a chief down there. We absolutely need a chief down a House Administration Committee to be staff director, and we need that perspective. We need the institution to have that personal office just experience that I thought was missing down there.
Cool.
And he was like, yes. And I was like, great. No fundraising, no constituent letters. I'm going to go, like, no one's even heard of House Admin. It's literally the smallest committee. I'm going to have cocktails. I got this great office. And then it was like, we had election reform, we had pandemic, we had insurrection, we had inauguration. At one point, we had moved more bills than Ways and Means.
Oh my gosh.
Because House Admin had election jurisdiction. And
Gotcha.
when the Democrats were in the majority, they wanted to address a lot of election issues.
For sure.
And so I thank goodness I'd had that Judiciary Committee experience. And I would push the team all the time. You got to make the majority earn it. And I think minorities should always do that to majorities. And we would always have tons of amendments, and we would be as prepared as we could be on the floor and in markup. And we used it as an opportunity. I mean, it would almost kill the team, right? Because we would have to react to whatever the majority put out, but we would put out our own version of what we were for too. Nice. And I would constantly challenge the team. We're talking about what we're for and what we're about. We're not talking about what we're against all day.
Nice.
And I say that all the time to people. Whatever party you are, make sure you're that party and not the opposition to the other party.
Yeah,
it's two different
sure.
things.
Yeah, because
two different things.
Cloudy real quick, you know.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you're supporting something you were against last time around when you were in the majority, or
Yes.
you know, so
you wake up and you're like, wait a minute, no one else can have a good idea that I can support just
Yeah.
because they're opposite of me.
For sure. I think that's a really good mindset. When it comes to, like, when a young staffer asks you the question of how important is it which member of Congress I work for, obviously you care very much about this, and you chose Rodney Davis because of who he was and how he was as a boss. But from an entry-level perspective, how important is it to try to work for a good boss, or do you just get your foot in the door? And then when it's like more senior level, the LD, the chief of staff, how much does it matter in that situation?
I think so many staff struggle with that. And I think of that staff often at CMF, of that staffer that might be a little disappointed by how their boss is behaving, or maybe isn't the boss they want to end up with. And I think about them all the time of how can I serve that office to give that staffer some professional development that maybe they're not getting. I think it's a mixed bag. And I was counseling a staffer a few years ago that was walking into a very difficult office. And I said, know your line. Every day, know your line.
Yeah.
And when you're going to walk when that line gets pushed further than you are. But if you don't have a line and someone pushes you and you've moved that line and you walk out of there not the same person that either you wanted to be or you were when you came in.
Yeah.
So I say to staff, make sure you know that line. I will say sometimes I've learned more from challenging offices than I've learned from like the perfect running office.
Yeah,
and so
for
I
sure.
brought all those different experiences to me. I think it's, are you using that office as a stepping stone? And is that office your hometown or your state, or is there some connection, or it's a committee you want to work at? But I think it's okay to work for an office that's challenging or a member that you don't love. I think just make sure it doesn't start to define you.
Yeah.
And that's when I tell people, you gotta pull the cord now. Now you're becoming only known as this office, right?
Would you say that same advice to someone who's coming in as a chief of staff?
Chief of staff, it's a completely different.
Okay.
I mean, you gotta drink the Kool-Aid all day, every day. You gotta believe in the member in the district. And you have to also be strong enough that you can't be so enamored by that member though that you're not gonna say no. And I think every chief has had this moment, and I had it when I was chief too, like, oh my gosh, I'm the only one that says no here. I am the only one that says no.
Yeah.
My mom would always be like, are you like that chief on Veep where she just says no all day? And I'm like, a little bit. And so I think for a member office, you have to believe in it. You can bring over-credentialed people to work in an office or in an organization, and if they don't believe or they don't know the member, it doesn't matter, because sometimes a relationship with the member will be knowledge of a subject matter taken away from.
You're managing a person too.
Yeah.
You know, like you need to have that close relationship there. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. I hope that was valuable for someone. I know it would have been when I was younger on the hill trying to figure that out.
It is a lot of dynamics to think through.
Yeah. It's like you want to get that first job, right? It's
yeah.
like
But you also don't want to be the best friend, right? It's like,
Yeah.
what's that fine balance? And I should have added that too. Like, you like the member, but you're also, it's like raising kids, right? The goal isn't to be your kid's best friend.
Yeah.
The goal is to do the job that you have. So,
yeah, that's very hard. Yeah, especially in places of power, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, okay, so you make the transition, you work in the public sector, go private sector, come back. What types of skill sets or ideas, technology were you able to bring back to the Hill with you to make your office run better?
I think it was a few fundamentals to really think about. And the Hill will force you in a defensive posture every day, right? And you can get up and you can sit at your desk and you can respond to emails. Or you can say, I have these 5 things to do. No matter what, these 5 things get done. And I think some discipline. I definitely came with a lot more discipline and a more thoughtful, offensive position, right? Because if you're doing government affairs for a company, you're constantly trying to get the Hill to do something that your organization wants them to do. And so it always is offensive. Sometimes it's defensive if someone's doing something and your company is screwed up or, folks are doing oversight of you. But primarily you're trying to get government to do something that's beneficial to your organization. And so working in that offensive nature, I brought that back to the Hill. And I also we have processes, we have policies, we have culture, and we have expectations, and kind of that really bedrock of fundamentals. It's like, we're not just here to have a party every day and see who calls and who wants to meet with us and what cool thing we get to go to that we put on our social media. It's like, here's what we're about. Here's our mission. Here's our 3 main goals. Here's our buckets of our criteria of what bills or letters or initiatives need to fit into. So I think that really brought that structure
It
back
seems
to the
like
Hill.
You're able to do that on the Hill, and now you're bringing that to the CMF as far as clearly defining what you're for. How do you go about setting up that protocol and defining those characteristics?
Sometimes I would do it by default. It was basically like the same advice I gave to my daughter the other day. I was like, you're getting behind me. You didn't have a good grade in this class, and now I'm on you. How do you get out in front of me? And so we would have moments. I would try to only have one moment on the same topic, right? And you're working for a new member, and you send the first vote rec. It's like, we got it. And then he's like, well, sorry, that was confusing. I need green, red. I'm like, okay, we got to have the color system. Let's don't let this happen again. Okay, then we have who's for the bill and who's against the bill. And we always tried to get in front of him. And I tried to not get burned. And if I got burned, I only got burned once. And then what was the breakdown here that he had a moment and we didn't serve him in a way he needed to be? And let's not have that moment happen again. And then just patterns all the time. Like, don't let patterns continue ever in your office. And one of the patterns was the district staff always needed information, talking points, what have you. And district staff just doing their job. So then I had seen it in another office that I worked at, and I brought, we're going to have the issue book. And the issue book can live electronically. That's every single big issue. It's every letter we've signed. It's every bill we've sponsored. It's quotes from press. It's the text of the letter. And then no one veers from the issue book.
Yeah.
And so then if he's speaking to the corn growers, we know the talking points on ethanol because we've made those. And you've got to have a forcing mechanism to make sure that staff and everybody goes and updates the issue book. Yeah. But I tried to have processes like that we got out of that loop of constantly having the same frictions over and over.
For sure.
Again.
Good organization. That's great. As far as how staffers can utilize technology to become more efficient and more organized on the Hill, what recommendations do you have?
The email is probably the biggest recommendation I have. And we've just changed so much on the Hill, and that, right, you had this impression at first that your email was like this, secret thing and no one could get into the, directory or what have you. And a lot of your traffic was internal and what have you. And then it became, okay, so your email's out there and you kind of accept that your email is public. And now it just that data is so accessible and you've lost control of your email box. And so I challenge staff of like, you don't want to be in a position that no one can get a hold of you from email. And how can you protect what you need from that email box, right? And I love how, when I was at IndyGov, we did do an app for the GOP conference, and I love the technology that private sector is bringing, and, how do you not have as many whip updates, and how are they coming in text and other ways? But I think the biggest chunk is get that email out of your inbox and into Slack. And I'm a huge Slack fan. And one of my staffers was like, I think we should do Slack. And I'm just like, I cannot have another thing I have to manage. And then the first day I was at IndyGov, I worked at a GovTech company right after the Hill. I mean, those guys were all techies, right? Yeah. And they gave me a Mac, which I hated, and we had a platform for everything. And I loved it. And I remember calling my old staffer, I'm like, I'm really sorry about that. We should have done Slack. And so now I encourage staff, like, let the younger staff run with it. Let them try it out. And if you're a chief and you're exhausted, just say, we're going to do a pilot program with the interns, right? And see how that works. So the staff assistant and the LC, but the biggest thing is it's not good to be inaccessible. And we've got too many staff that are not accessible. And you've got to protect your email inbox. And so get that staff internal email or get anything else that you don't want in there. And then always have processes that if someone leaves, it continues. Yeah. The tours, the letters you sign, the bills you sponsored, all of it. Operationalize all of that.
Yeah, it'd be great.
And leverage software.
The person that was staff assistant before me in my first office, because there was
digging out
no process,
Yeah.
But, we won't call any people out here today.
We won't name names this podcast.
But that's such an important part of this. I think email management was so frustrating on the Hill. It always felt overwhelming. And because we weren't using any task management tools or communicating anywhere else, like that inbox was like my reminder system too, So like I would leave stuff unread on purpose, and then it keeps piling up. And so.
And it's the folders, and it's, there's so much to it. So maybe CMF should be offering an email course, which I'm working on. But I challenge folks, if you have a pain point in your office, there's probably a solution to that, and lean into that solution.
Nice. So Connect, we love Asana, but we know you guys are kind of Asana haters over here. So
it's not our favorite.
Do you have a platform that you like to stay organized outside of Slack, or is it really like Slack is your home?
Slack is our home right now. We're looking at events management software. And we have Dropbox, and we use the share drive appropriately because Jordan Davis is our head of communications, who was the former guest on the podcast, and he's amazing. He's brought a lot of discipline. So I think it's making sure that it's not a choose-your-own-adventure moment, which we're not perfect at that, and we're trying to get better too. But it's okay. So we're not going to do Google Docs and Dropbox, and everyone has their documents within their own whatever. Here's what we're going to do, and we're all going to follow it. And I even think like software of having really good software about reimbursements, and you don't get a choice on that in the Hill, but in the private sector, benefits and reimbursements and days off and all those things can be operationalized. And if there's a way to do it on the Hill a little bit more than we are now, I encourage folks to do that too. But
so to wrap it up, what advice would you give yourself as you were starting off as a staffer that would set you up for like even more success than you're currently seeing? But like, what would be that thing that you could go back and tell her?
I would read more. I am such an extrovert. I've become a little bit more of an introvert the older I get, but I was such an extrovert, and I have a somewhat photographic memory if I hear something. And so I really just received a lot of information through meetings or in person. I probably needed to supplement that more.
Gotcha.
With a CRS report, or I'm just never been that person that like sits down and is like, okay, well, I've got the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. And I probably could think about reading more to make sure that my policy was even more solid. Like I did Voting Rights Act twice. And I learned a lot about the Voting Rights Act during our hearings, but I should have probably read a book about it before I started working on it.
Fair enough.
So
do you, in your opinion, more like professionally focused reading and research?
Yeah.
Cool.
I should have been my own CRS a little bit more than that's that kind of intention.
Yeah.
I try to be really intentional now with things I do and people I talk to and meetings I take. And a little more intention when you're a younger staffer goes a long way.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like when you're a younger staffer, you lack the wisdom of like what comes next or how to handle situations. And so anytime that you can rely on someone who's done it before and like take that information in, I'm sure that's very helpful.
And I think personal metrics too. And I learned that early on when I was in private sector and government relations is that you had to be able to, you're a cost center. And how do you justify to the C-suite what you're doing?
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of discipline and organization of like, well, we delivered on these 4 or 5 things, right? And sometimes in a personal office, you just wake up every day and you answer the email. It's like, no. What were my goals for this year? What were my goals in this position? Who were people I wanted to meet? What are subject matters I needed to know?
Yeah.
And even if your office isn't setting those goals, set them for yourself.
For sure. And I think like looking on social media sometimes, seeing offices that are really good about displaying that data too, of like we answered this many like constituent emails or filled like this many or like whatever the situation is, like I think it's really good to track that and to communicate it back to the people that you're working for, like you would do that with a boss, and technically they are your boss. So.
And then it makes it easier for when you're applying for the Democracy Awards.
There you go.
You have all your data to show how amazing your office is.
Yeah. Next time on the podcast, we can talk about data because I'm sure we could all use some updates there.
And I have such an interesting perspective on particularly constituent communications data, right? Having been a chief in a vulnerable district, I go down to House Admin, I run the franking. We redo the franking rules, the purple book that exists. Yeah. That was me and my partner, Lisa Sherman, who's at the CAO. We did the purple book along with the members who were very supportive of that process. And then I go to Indigov, which is a GovTech startup that's a CRM for the Hill. And you see the back end of 100 offices. And then you see what legislatures and states and governors and that data and that system I've learned a lot that hopefully I'm trying to apply at CMF and bring that knowledge back too.
Nice. Well, that's great. Jen Daulby, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
It's great to be here. I appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to Capital Spotlight Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe to our channels to stay updated on new releases, share the show with your friends, and rate the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. For more from Connect, subscribe to our daily newsletters, follow us on social media, and check out our website, all at Capital Connect, capital with an O, CNCT. See you next time.